Last explanation deals with this portion of the lab. So you should have now calculated your atomic weight, your relative average atomic mass is another way of saying that. So you should have your number inside this box and you should have labeled it. Now, we wouldn't just take that number, from one group and then use that number on a periodic table. Realistically, there would be, several groups, possibly even hundreds of groups that would be repeating, the same procedure you did, coming up with their answer, and then we would get an average of all of those answers, and then that's what would be printed on the periodic table. So that's what this next part of the lab alludes to. If you look here, we've just taken 6 groups and we've compiled their data. So they have their calculated atomic weight as far as what they came up with. And so what I'm asking you to do is to look at their numbers and look at your number and then come up with an average. And hopefully you all know how to come up with an average. Now here's the catch, right? Remember, the sample I gave you was random, right? And so, how do you get a random sample? Well, in our case, we took the cup, we put it inside the bucket, pulled out some beans, and we counted them. And so we're assuming that all the other groups did the same thing, and we're assuming that all the other groups did not make any mistakes. All of their calculations were done correctly. And so I'd like you to look at the numbers here. And this kind of goes back to that precision part that we talked about. So along with your number and the numbers here, is there a number here that maybe doesn't belong? And if you feel that way, then what we'd have to do is we would just drop it out of our data set. We would not have to include it. Now, we mentioned that they did everything correctly, but remember that random sample? All it means is maybe their sample was not as random as all the other groups. So in a sense, when they put their little beaker in there in the bucket, they maybe didn't get as random a sample as all the other groups did. And so that does happen. And so what we have to do is this is interpreting your data. So when I ask you to look at your number, right, and then I ask you to come down here and take other numbers from this table to calculate the average, would you leave out any of these numbers? And you should, I guess, is what I'm telling you now. So what would you leave out? What would you keep in to determine your average? And what I'd like you to do is, once you determine your average, go ahead and put that number down here in the box and then label it. If you forgot how to get an average, remember the numbers that you're going to use. You're going to add them all up and then divide by however many numbers you added together. That's how you get an average. And then I want you to round it to just 2 numbers past the decimal point and then label it correctly.